We are recording.
Okay, I'm sorry. Hi, well, good evening and welcome. My name is Todd Tharp, Assistant Director with the Iowa High School Athletic Association, and we are excited here this evening to pretty much for our first time share with you some information that was created by our brand new Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, which is a joint effort between the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union, the Iowa High School Athletic Association, the Iowa High School Music Association, and the Iowa High School Speech Association. So all four of our organizations have been involved in this. And one of the first initiatives that was approved back in April was implementing some guidelines for the wet bulb globe thermometer, and starting for the fall for the 2004-2005 school year. So we brought in some of our experts from the Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, and I'm going to, you don't want to hear any more from me, so I'm going to turn things over to Sarah Bancroft, who is the chair of our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, to introduce herself and the other folks that'll be on this call, on this webinar, and take you through some of the policies and guidelines with our new initiative with the wet bulb globe thermometer. So Dr. Bancroft, the store is yours. So
thanks so much, Todd, for helping introduce us tonight. And so yes, I'm Dr. Sarah Bancroft, and I'm very excited about this first webinar of our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee on heat-related illness and wet bulb globe temperature. And so I'll do a quick introduction of myself and then my colleagues, and then we're going to go through a short presentation tonight, just kind of reviewing what we've come up with, the guidelines and policies for Iowa, and then we'll have an opportunity for question and answers via the question and answer box within the bottom panel if you have some of those. So we just ask that we would love to field your questions, but a lot of them I think we will be unraveling tonight as we do our presentation. So if you can kind of think of those, write some of those down on a little scrap sheet of paper, and then if they still aren't answered by the end, we're happy to field those in our Q&A box. So I'll introduce myself first. Again, I'm Dr. Sarah Bancroft. I'm in my 12th year of practice in sports medicine. I did a family practice residency and then fellowship in sports medicine. And I have a vested interest in Iowa. I have a couple of kids that are in the middle school level, but moving up into high school soon. And I myself grew up in the Quad Cities and have a couple of brothers. We all did sports, and both my parents coached. And so been around sports a long time, and I'm very excited to be part of this group. In addition, I'm also one of the Iowa State team physicians. So you might see me on the sideline if you're around one of our sporting events at Iowa State, and I also teach in the Iowa State athletic training program. So I will let Dr. Adam Szymanski introduce himself quickly.
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Adam Szymanski. I'm based out of Dubuque, Iowa. I've been here for about 3 years now. Prior to coming to Iowa, I spent 15 years active duty in the Navy, and the last almost 5 years as the sports medicine department head at the Naval Academy. Here in Dubuque, I am the head team physician at Loras College at the Dubuque Fighting Saints, and then I also cover Hempstead High School. So same thing like Sarah said, if you end up at one of our local events, feel free to come over and say hi, and look forward to answering some questions tonight. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Dr. Szymanski. And then I'll let Rochelle Williams introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Rochelle Williams. I'm faculty at Drake University. I'm also an athletic trainer, and a lot of my research is around sports safety and pediatric sport-related concussions. I have a PhD in pediatric sport-related concussions, and so a lot of this is pertinent, and I continue to kind of work with the Girls Union a lot on some of these initiatives.
Thanks, Rochelle. And then last on from our committee is Anna Manternak.
That's right. Anna Monternack. I work in the Liberty High School. I'm the athletic trainer out there. This is, I believe, my 19th year working in the secondary setting. It's my favorite. They're goofy kids. They're great kids. And I'm really excited to be able to work with Sarah and Rochelle and the rest of the committee on initiatives and just guiding the safety policies and procedures and doing what we can so that kids can continue to play and enjoy the world.
Thanks, Anna. All right. So we're going to jump into our presentation tonight, and I'm going to kind of introduce what our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee is, since we're brand new and won't have to necessarily do this in other webinars, but this is our inaugural webinar. So within our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, we're basically a group of sports medicine providers who are advising on health and safety issues for the high school unions. And so we have a committee, and we've created a large charter document that kind of outlines our policies and procedures, just like any other large committee would have. And within that, we actually fall under the National Federation of High Schools. So all 50 states actually have a Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. We happen to be the 50th, so we are the last, but that does not mean that we can't benefit from what a lot of our colleagues have put forth with their policies and guidelines before us. So that's kind of one of the benefits of being the last, is we have a lot of different state policies and guidelines, as well as all the national guidelines to look at. So within the state of Iowa, we collectively used to be separate organizations, which was the IMS Sports Medicine Subcommittee, which is the physician group. The athletic trainers had their own group, which is called IATS. And then the Boys and Girls Unions had their own thing going. And so what we really are trying to do is pull all of those groups together, along with speech and music now, and kind of create this large collective group that can advise on all of the health and safety, which is really what we've wanted for so long. And now we're finally able to do that. So we have members of our committee, including our executive team, which is myself, Rochelle, and Anna. And then we have different voting members. So we have about 10 to 12 other voting members that mostly are sports medicine physicians and athletic trainers, but we have other healthcare providers on that voting part of our committee. And then we are partnering with the liaisons from some of the larger groups. So we, of course, have the 4 unions that we've talked about. And then we have invited other people, such as the IMS has liaisons, IATS, and then the collective athletic directors. And so we can have different people who are non-voting members who join us in meetings and make sure that we have their voice and input on how we create these guidelines and policies as we do those. So again, we do oversee, or we're giving guidance and advice to the Boys and Girls Union, the Music and Speech Union, which is not unique. Many states actually have music and speech also under their Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, but not all do. So we are a little bit more up and coming with that. And what we're really trying to do, again, is just provide any type of guidance and information that we can, and recommendations that helps improve the health and safety of these groups. And so we're really focusing on our evidence-based practices and trying to make sure that we are merging all of those evidence-based practices, but making them practical for Iowa, because we know that not every school is the same in Iowa. And so we have members from our committee that are from all the different parts of Iowa. We make sure they're representing small schools, big schools, urban areas, rural areas, again, trying to reflect the fact that we need to have the ability to adjust guidance to make sure that it is applicable to all the different schools and organizations that we're working with. So I will segue a little bit into the next slide, which just talks about our process. We have been partnering for the last 12 months with an organization called the Corey Stringer Institute and Tufts. And so in April of last year, we met and collectively had about half healthcare providers and half other liaisons and representatives from large groups in Iowa. And we basically sat down together with the Corey Stringer Institute, and we discussed evidence-based guidelines and research that relates to specifically heat-related policy and prevention and wet bulb globe temperature, as well as other things that Iowa might need to look at in the next few years for health and safety. And the Corey Stringer Institute was actually founded in 2010 after the death of Corey Stringer, who was a Minnesota Viking lineman. He died sadly at a practice for the Vikings in 2001. And so in his honor, and to try and help curtail any further heat-related illness, injury, or death, the Corey Stringer Institute was started 14 years ago. So A lot of our lectures and information that we got in April were related to that, which is very fortuitous since we ended up getting that as our first assignment as part of our sports medicine advisory committee. And so we listened to people who've got 20 years of data on heat-related illness, are practicing in the field, athletic trainers in high schools, and other national leaders in this in April. And then we basically took that information and we were able to compare what they're doing in other states as well as the national guidelines. And we were able to create collectively those guidelines. And so we did that as a group and then met as an entire sports medicine advisory committee, reviewed those guidelines and eventually voted on them and got them out to the unions in June. And then they were approved in July. So that's just kind of an overview of our process. Again, just talking about how we really want to focus on making practical evidence-based guidelines for the state of Iowa and making sure that it is applicable to what we're doing here. And I'm going to go and let Anna start talking about what actually is wet bulb globe temperature.
Right. It is a magical machine, right? This is one of the versions out there. And what the wet bulb globe thermometry takes into account all of the things that, all the factors that lead into what it feels like to a body exercising in the sun. So it accounts for direct sunlight. Also then it accounts for cloud cover. It accounts for the humidity. It accounts for the sun angle. It accounts for wind speed. It accounts for radiant heat from your surface. So if you're on a turf field versus a grass field. And it kicks all of that into this equation that is listed on the slide in front of you, and spits out a number. And I think one of the most important things to remember as you talk to coaches who are concerned about numbers is that the number it kicks out does not correspond to the ambient air temperature, right? It has nothing, it's its own scale, it's its own measure. So we just need to accept that as we go into the next few slides. You can go ahead, Rochelle. In a perfect world, you would take this temperature, you'd take your device out, you'd set it on a tripod in the middle of the field, the middle of your playing surface, about 15 minutes before practice starts. It will do its calculations, it averages, it gets a feel for what's really going on outside. And then we take that reading. In a perfect world, the same person would do a reading every 30 minutes or so throughout practice so that we can adjust. As most high schools, I think, would safe to say, practice in the afternoon. Your reading at the start of practice will likely be higher than at the end of practice. So if, we can adjust just because we're practicing under, in the red zone or the orange zone, and we'll get to that. You may be able to go a little harder as the night goes on, just depending on what these numbers, what the measurements show you. You do want to. So I would like I said, I work at Liberty High School and I've got my freshmen practice on grass, my upperclassmen are on turf. So I would need to measure in both settings, right? They're going to be different numbers. So we want to practice with that. You want to make sure ideally the same person in a perfect world, the same person would be measuring or would be taking these readings. And then recording them. And again, just adjusting, providing the guidelines or reminding coaching staff of the guidelines that we will present here next. That's kind of the quick and dirty summary for most sports. In some of the appendices that were sent out, and I think we'll talk about it later, there are specific guidelines for middle schoolers. There are specific guidelines for or modifications for a marching band. A lot of our outdoor activity in the heat it happens with football, right? We think about our football players and the pads and the long practice sessions. So as you look at your wet bulb globe thermometer, if it's giving you a reading of 79.7 or lower, good to go. Carry on as usual. Stick within that 3-hour limit as set forth by the union. And then I don't think I need to read through this entire chart word for word, but just as we can see that as the temperature increases, as the reading increases, I'm sorry, not the temp, as the reading increases, this chart will spell out how we change our practice protocols to maintain the health and safety of our athletes. I've had coaches ask, are we ever gonna practice if it's hot, or what are we gonna do during baseball season? And I think, again, we have to remember that this is not ambient temp. This is taking into account the wind. It's taking into account the clouds. we want to look at, it's not saying at 70, 80 and a reading of 80, we don't stop out practice, but we add more water. What things can we do? What steps can we take to maximize this, or to ensure the safety of the athletes without stopping practice in its entirety? We talked a little bit about this, though it really is the gold standard for measuring because of all the different factors that it considers. Heat illness is one of those things that it's just preventable. It's the thing that we can prevent. We can't prevent a lot of things in sport. We can't prevent a lot of things in life, but heat illness, heat stroke, heat emergencies are 1000% preventable. And the wet bulb globe temperature, that device, that system is really the gold standard, the thing that we have in our toolbox to keep kids safe. Local news forecasts sometimes are starting to talk about the wet bulb globe thermometry, but not reliably. And when they do, they're going to take that reading at one specific place that is likely not your field or your gym or your cross-country course. So again, this is where it needs to be site specific. It has to be specific to your field. What's happening at Liberty, what's happening in Ames, what's happening in Des Moines. Everyone's going to have a different number. So that's why we have to have it at your site. Talked a little bit about this as well. The heat index, I did not know this until the spring, that the heat index really is based upon an average size adult, roughly 150 pounds, in the shade, moving at most at 3.1 miles per hour, which is not very fast. It assumes their core temperature is normal. And as you can imagine, that doesn't apply to any of our athletes at any time, right? We know that our core temperature rises 1 to 2 degrees after 5 minutes of activity, unless mitigating factors are available. So it's not useful if I say, well, the heat index says it's only 85. Okay, but now step out from under that tree. Is it really 85 out in the sunshine on the turf when you're running? So we look at, again, it says right here in the slides that yes, in warm-ups, it doesn't take much activity for that core temp to increase. And that's the temp that we're concerned about. I don't care how warm your forehead feels. We really need to make sure that that core temp stays within safe ranges. And I alluded to this a little bit. This is the biggest concern, I think, of my coaches, is that we're going to have to cancel all the time. You won't. We're not asking you to not practice. We're not asking you to stay home in the basement playing video games. What this policy does is, again, it guides what you can do, how you can practice, not how you can't. These are not new policies. These have been around for decades. And the notion of, well, my athletes are unprepared. These are guidelines that we're recommending, we're asking all schools to follow. So if, in Iowa City, if Liberty's practicing, probably West is practicing. If we're canceling, probably City's canceling too. We all should be working under the same guidance here. So I just want to reassure the ADs so you can reassure your coaches that I really don't see significant hardships coming out of this policy. We see a lot of benefit, a lot of health and safety coming out. The question about acclimatization, that policy will not change. That is critical to the health of our athletes. So this just comes alongside and helps us get through those hot weeks. Right now it's beautiful. I haven't had my wet bulb globe thermometer out at all. It's been fantastic. But it's coming. So hopefully we're acclimating our athletes now. We'll adjust when we need to when it gets hot, because it's going to get hot. But no, preseason acclimatization is still critical. It's still a very important part of the season.
These two slides are just shows, if anybody needs them, the football practice schedule from the high school association that has been posted. We are now going to kind of talk about a little bit of the sport-specific practice guidance for sports. So some football-related conditions, and then marching band, cheerleading. We'll kind of go into a couple of other specific scenarios. I know the big question often comes with football. So orange, red, and black are our biggest modifications for equipment reduction. All of them have modifications related to breaks, including water, additional rest time, and having certain things and equipment available. But these are for modifications on reducing clothing. So making sure our helmet, shoulder pads, and shorts are only worn. If we are in the black, we are not doing outdoor activity or canceling or delaying practice until our WBGT is a little bit lower. Red, we're in shorts and t-shirts, no helmets. And then orange, obviously, we're modifying out of full practice pads, but we are in helmets, shoulder pads, and shorts. Marching band and cheerleading, depending on kind of where they are practicing. For marching band, if you are in full uniform, think of it similarly as football. So our marching band directors, you kind of are our marching band athletes do have a ton of equipment on, so making sure that we are in partial or half uniform if we're in the orange, and then red, we're actually out of uniform. So thinking of like shorts and t-shirts, whatever is the best equipment available to our athletes. And then black is no outdoor activity, cancel or delay our activities or practices until later or at a different opportunity. If there was an opportunity to move into an indoor AC for marching band, that could potentially happen at that black point, but making sure that all of these, we still have water and available rest and appropriate equipment available for heat illness. For cheerleading, very similar, although our cheer uniforms may not be as heavy as our marching band uniforms, we still have to make modifications related to our breaks and water available. And then if we can go down, if we are in full cheer uniforms or if they're in pants and heavy tops, then we're moving down to shorts and t-shirts. So similar modifications for those three sports are the ones that we really think most. We'll then kind of talk a little bit about modifications for competition. We still want to use the WBGT for all contests. We can make changes to the contest times if needed. If we know in advance, we're like, hey, we know that the potential temperature is going to be really high, so that our readings are likely going to be higher. Maybe is there a way we can move it to an hour later start or an earlier start, depending on our sport. We then start adding in those hydration breaks based on modification. So we aren't canceling contests yet. At this point, it's just adding additional breaks. If you've ever been at state soccer in the last few years, we've added quarter breaks in the quarters between halves to add additional water time for referees and players. So that is the opportunity to do that. And then at all of these, we still have to have cold water immersion available. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit later, especially if we are not canceling contests. For football, some of the recommendations is if it is in the red, we want them to have some mandatory hydration breaks at 6-minute marks of the quarter, and then hydration breaks should last at least 3 minutes. That means they have to actually take their helmets off. We don't allow coaches on the field, very similarly as any other allocated timeout or break that is in there. And then if at kickoff the temperature is above 89.8 or greater and we're in that black area, those are our mandatory hydration breaks that are come a little bit sooner in time, and they're a little bit longer. And the same thing, we don't allow coaches on, it's not an official timeout, it's the water timeout, it's truly to cool our players down. For cross country, if we are in the red and or black, we would like to have some hydration stations throughout the race course and consider kind of if we can have somebody trailing throughout the race, especially if we are in those higher temperatures or readings, WBGT readings. We definitely want somebody to make sure that nobody's falling behind and collapsing. We do want a trailer throughout that, and then the hydration stations in throughout the course, depending on kind of what the course looks like. For soccer competitions, we similar adding those 3-minute hydration breaks to the midpoint of that half. So we'll kind of think of it as like we're almost playing quarters at this time. And those are true hydration breaks only. They're not coach breaks. They're for referees and for players. And then for baseball and softball with the summer, we are adding 3-minute hydration breaks potentially between the three innings. And then if needed, we could have additional time in between innings, and then making sure our umpires is the biggest aspect, as that sometimes we forget that they're out there regardless. They don't go in the dugout. So making sure that oftentimes these are set for referees and umpires, making sure they are getting adequate hydration and potentially some cooling during that 3-minute or every inning kind of time point. For those who also oversee any sort of middle school athletes, these are some guidance. The readings are a little bit lower. or we add a little bit of different change for breaks for middle school. So if you compare them, they're pretty similar. We're just adding a little bit more time. We're thinking about 4 separate rest breaks. And you can kind of see how we would do modifications based on those. So if you do oversee any of our middle school athletes, this is it is important. We do need to do a WBGT for them as well. So making sure we're doing appropriate modifications as needed. So with all of these, part of the guidance is that we're trying to prevent heat illness, and there are different types of heat illness. So we have heat or fatigue or cramps is what we call them. And we really want to make sure that we're preventing heat exhaustion and then particularly heat stroke. Heat stroke is 100% preventable, but it's also, if we do not prevent it, it is one of the highest mortality and morbidity rates of all the heat related illnesses. So making sure that we are reducing our core body temperatures below 102. At that point, usually heat stroke is at 105 or higher. So we want to drop it down below that temperature to appropriately cool our body. So having those cold water immersions available is really important at any point when we're reading WBGTs. So cold water immersions are, you can either have them a tub, and they kind of have some different reference resources for you, but it can be a full immersion tub, it could be a tarp, it could be a body bag, you can have any sort of inflatable pool, as long as you can immerse an individual in water and cooling. So making sure that we have some cooling techniques. 911 is available to be called. EMS should be contacted if you suspect heat stroke. And then making sure that we cool first and then transport second is the biggest aspect. So we're not calling 911, having EMS go take somebody without cooling them first. So any type of yellow through black in our modifications or readings, we have to have some sort of cold water immersion available. So that includes water and ice, so that we can have a quick accessibility to dunk somebody or pull them into cold water if needed. Some basic setting up for cold water immersion is just making sure that we can have an immersion aspect, and then roughly 35 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit would be the temperature that we would kind of want the water to be cooled to. Obviously not, we have some differences in resources available for water and ice, but making sure that we can rapidly cool somebody is important. And then these are some different opportunities or options that you can have. A tarp is really cheap, inexpensive. You can also talk to your mortuaries in town or funeral homes for body bags. Those are really, they often donate those. You can ask Fleet Farm or any of the big tractor supply companies. They're more than willing to donate or do bulk purchases on really cheap tubs, or you can think of them as horse troughs. Anything that's inflatable you can use as well for cold water immersion. So making sure that if we are taking readings, at this point, we do need to have resources available for cooling. I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. Bancroft.
Okay, so we hit you with lots of info. Hopefully some of it looks familiar because it's a lot of the information that's in the guidelines, or mostly all just from the guidelines, just reviewing kind of extra tidbits of information about those areas and keys to the guidelines and maybe why we have them in there. And so this page of resources is for you. You know, everybody loves YouTube. My kids watch YouTube all the time, but there's lots of fun YouTube videos to look at, and we tried to give ones that we thought were accurate representations of things that we would like you to be doing, or how you'd like to, or how we would like you to be doing different things like the readings and how to set up the cold water immersion and all of that. So take a look at those, especially if you have questions and need help with setup, or if you have coaches that have questions about, well, how should this look, or where should I do it? These are really great resources for you to do that with. And at the end, we just had a few specific questions, I guess, that are related to things that we've already somewhat fielded. So just so you know, when there's larger questions now within the High School Boys and Girls Union, that many or most of those are passed along to us when they're related to health and safety. And so these are just kind of some questions that we have fielded, and you know, basically things like anything from why is wet bulb globe temperature better? I think Anna really touched on that a lot already, and that it's way more accurate than heat index, and that we aren't all average size and in the shade running at 3 miles an hour. So the question about, well, if, you know, there's discussion about soccer and baseball, what about wrestling or other non-climate controlled settings? So the answer to that is really, if you are not climate controlled, so let's say you're at volleyball practice and you're indoors and you don't have air conditioning in that gym, then yes, you should be using the wet bulb globe thermometer in your gym to see, is there guidance and changes that you need to be doing in practice. One of the most recent fatalities, sadly, was actually in the South with a middle schooler who was practicing in a non-climate controlled indoor gym in the summer in basketball. So it does happen. Heat-related issues do happen indoors as well. And so that would be relatable to wrestling, especially as well. If they're not using air conditioning for that day, they should be using the same guidance related to timing of water breaks and rest breaks and how long practices should be. So what happens if we change between different readings, and how does that affect our practice? You know, ideally, like Anna said, we should be looking at checking our readings everywhere from 15 to 20 minutes if possible. And then we might need to alter what zone we go to. So unfortunately, when we go up a zone, we do need to change to that zone's guidance. And so this is where it's hard, because life doesn't always allow us to be as flexible as we want, or we don't want to be as flexible as we need to be. However, it is important that we try our best to be able to adapt to the higher reading. And so we would change into that higher reading. So that's also why when Rochelle mentioned, hey, if we think that there's a good chance that my practice is going to get, you know, we'll say in a bad way, sabotaged, because it's basically going to create issues with us having to decrease the amount of time, or I'm not going to get to what I need to, et cetera, then I might need to move up my practices, or might push back my practice times. And so one of the things that was addressed with us with Bud Cooper is that, you know, in Georgia, which is way hotter than us, his coaches have to be creative, and a lot of them have done very different things than they're used to since their heat policy came out to help prevent heat illness. So they may be practicing early in the morning, or they may be practicing late at night if necessary. And that's unfortunately, you know, what might have to change, but it is, again, to prevent any of these heat illnesses or deaths. We did address the where readings should be taken already. Again, they need to be taken in a setting that is very similar at what you would expect. So, you know, you're going to know ahead of time if you're planning on doing like a trail run with your cross country runners today, or if you're going to be doing a street run on sidewalks. So take the reading where it's going to be applicable to what you're doing that particular day. Same with golf. Make sure you're taking in the sun, not in the shade under a tree, because obviously the kids are walking and most of the courses are not going to have a ton of shade. We've already addressed some of the indoor questions. And again, it's really anything that's non-climate controlled should fall into these settings. And we know that some gyms do not have air, and that still does fall under a non-climate controlled setting. So you do need to take readings there. Marching band should be taking the reading if they're practicing at different times. And artificial turf versus grass, basically, you need to take your reading on the surface you're on. And so Anna again gave an example how her fields are different. Turf, we know, is going to be way hotter. It's like ricochet for the heat. So it's going to potentially change how practice is, and maybe you need to change what field you're practicing on if it's that significantly different from day to day from turf to grass. So, all right. Well, we are done with, I guess, our slide part of the presentation, and we would love to start kind of looking at some questions from you guys and answer those. And okay. So I can go ahead and read off one of the questions. So with the cross-country kids running away from the school campus, how do we handle things like full body immersion? So I will open that up to Rochelle to answer real quick.
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, with some of our courses are longer and they could be out in an area that might be a little bit more rural, but making sure that we have access to somewhere within the at least 5 minutes, frequently less, like about 1 to 3 minutes would be preferred, but somehow to get transport somebody there. So if it's a golf cart, car available, to that we know that there is a direct point at the start or finish line or finish of wherever you're running, is that we do have those points. And then if you do know that it's going to be quite warm, we do start taking readings when it is 80 degrees. So that's kind of our minimum of like, you need to start doing WBGT readings. So if you know that you're going to end up having to take readings, you might want to modify your course already so that especially if it's just a practice and they're running around away from campus, maybe keeping them closer to campus where there is a cold water immersion available. So making those adjustments based on our readings at that point.
Great. That's really good. And then a second question we have, I would say it was kind of addressed the first question. This person had it just said, is it a problem that cross country and many schools have various practice places they practice and may not be able to set it up easily? Unfortunately, if they're running at an off site location, then you may need to get another wet globe thermometer for them, if that's a thing. The good part about running is you can run anywhere. So there is the ability, again, just unfortunately to modify where you're running and maybe adjust that, particularly if it's a hot day. Like Anna said, it hasn't been super hot around here. So there's that part of things where, you know, there's a lot more flexibility this time of year, but if you start to get warm, then maybe the guidance is that you just have practice closer to the location of school with cold water immersion. The second part of that question, I'll let somebody else field, but, or I guess it's just a comment to say that junior high, when you get into the black setting versus high school, you are supposed to not compete. And that is a good observation from that person, is that potentially you would be not competing if they were in black. Can you pull up that slide, Rochelle, really quick on the middle school though? So we can look at
these are practice guidelines for middle school. So
okay.
We don't make any contest recommendations for middle school. So this is, although we do say cancel contest lower until lower is recorded, obviously we don't make policies for middle school, but making sure that we are looking at adjusting times or delaying or canceling.
Pete, I see your clarification question about not being able to set up the wet bulb 15 minutes ahead of time. It's ideal, right? That gives you the most accurate information, as the reading takes into account the wind and the variable clouds and what have you. I think with cross country, because they're running on different surfaces, there can be some wiggle room here, right? We want to get our best reading, we want to do our very best, but we also recognize real life. So if you're able to set it up outside in the grass, outside your office 15 minutes before the end of the school day, or if a coach or someone can do it during their warm-up time while the kids are getting changed, you don't have to stand right next to it for that whole 15 to 20 minutes. I think there can be some wiggle room. Hopefully that's a little more helpful. It's going to give you a number real quick, but you may not have the most accurate number. You may end up modifying more than you would really need to. So it's, again, gold standard says 15 to 20. I think there can be some flexibility within that. Is that fair, Rochelle, Dr. Bancroft?
Yeah.
There was a question about having Would multiple wet bulbs be recommended? Yeah, you bet. If you've got the budget and you can find them, go for it. You can order from the company, you can order on Amazon, you can order from Medco, anywhere, wherever your athletic training supplies, your tape budget, wherever you order those types of things. Most of those companies will carry a wet bulb globe thermometer.
Kestrel is the brand that we have promoted on here just because it's one that is widely used. So if you did need a brand to look through, Kestrel is one of them. This might be a question for Aaron and maybe Todd of just if the umpires and officials have been provided this guidance.
At this particular time, we have not shared directly with any of our game officials. We're still in the registration period for football. I believe there was some information that might have went as part of the rules meeting for the officials, but I don't know specifically the WBGT was talked about. So maybe working with you three, we can provide some quick FAQs for our officials regarding, communicating or having that, that pre-meeting with everybody involved, and so that we all know where we're at. Because normally in the past, we would make a statewide email saying, with heat and humidity, we're requiring all games tonight to have a heat and hydration break. That might not necessarily be the case this year, where it might be on a region by region situation. Again, those that have turf, those that don't have turf. So, with that pre-meet that we have, where we have the game administrators and the officials and athletic trainers getting together before the game, might be a very valuable thing. And I know the Corey Stringer Institute has a form that we can use, and maybe we can get that on our website and modify it so that we do a better job of having that pre-game meeting with all necessary stakeholders.
Yeah, I really like that, Todd. You're bringing up kind of what we call the medical minute, right?
Yeah.
Where we try and get together
you.
with our healthcare providers, our officials, and I think it's important to have the team captains there also, if possible, just to show them what's going on. And then obviously it would be something that like your clock people would need to know if you're having special breaks, so that they could be aware to stop things, et cetera. So it'll take some time, obviously, to learn all of that. But I think, the different breaks for contests in particular are not too hard, since they're kind of coming at interval spacing if they're higher readings like the orange, red, or black. So, yeah.
I don't have the ability to put a question in, and I guess I want to ask the question, and maybe this is the dangerous question, but I notice in practices, when it says that in practice time, once we get to black, we are canceling the practice.
That's middle school, Todd.
Middle school. All right.
That was the middle school guidance.
So for football practice, if it gets into black, we can still delay the activity, so that there's no difference between what we'd be doing with the black in the game. We're still going to play the game. We're going to make the modifications similar to what we would do with the practice time in black as well too. So I think there was maybe some confusion among some of our coaches. I think that, they were maybe not reading correctly, but we don't necessarily have to cancel the practice. We might just have to delay it or move it to a different time until that WBGT is lower, similar to what we would do. But if in a game situation, if it ever would there be a time where we would think about having to cancel the game because of this?
I think it's, go ahead, Anna.
No,
if you want to clarify his cancel part.
Yeah. So with games, they happen at night. I know you're going to come back at me with JV games, and you're right. They happen in the afternoon or in the morning sometimes. And so we maybe need to look at JV and those lower level games that start earlier. But typically the wet bulb globe is going to come down as the sun sets, right? We can just bank on that. So it may be that on the days where we're sitting in the black at 5 o'clock, we maybe need to bump that game back, or maybe we have to reschedule the lower level game. And I know that's awful. That's so hard to do. But it's not saying, no, you can't ever play. It's just saying, hey, for the safety, because we know the risks, we know that this is dangerous. Maybe we have to bump it back to 8 or 9. If the two schools decide, well, this is ludicrous, we don't want to play football at 9 o'clock at night, all of your athletic trainers will agree with you. We don't want to do that either, but we would. Maybe you come back in the morning then when it's cooler. It's all about the modifications and just understanding the reality of the environment and how that environment will impact our students.
Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it very much.
And
we are
canceling.
Oh, go ahead, sir.
Well, I was just gonna say, and again, remember the flow of games versus practices. So practices are the riskier environment because they don't have built-in breaks. So that is what we take into consideration, and the differences really between practice and games. And so, yeah, I think there's going to be, some modifications that might have to be on the fly if you're in a black zone on a night of a football game. But on the flip side, typically a player is going to be coming out and taking breaks, or if they're playing both sides, we can still build in those breaks at the 4 minutes mark of each quarter. So they're getting several different breaks. Despite that, it's the practices that are really the high risk environment. It's not the games are no risk, but practices can become very long and hot, and it is really where the biggest risk lies. So,
A question for you, too, again, sorry, regarding, football, we allow football teams to have, basically 3 hours of practice time, one practice a day for 3 hours, and the coach can do what he wants to during that 3-hour time frame. So, we go in for the first hour and we're in the green or the yellow, and then we go in for an hour and do some chalk talk, or we break down some video, and we're inside for an hour, and then we come back out for that third hour. But during that third hour, the WBGT has now moved into the orange range. Are we saying that because it's moved up to that's now the modifications we need to make for that, or because they've had an hour break inside, we can go back to where it was originally? And maybe you're not prepared to answer that question, but I know that's some of the questions that we have gotten to is, hey, we're in for an hour, we're outside for an hour, we're in for an hour, and we're out for an hour. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what's kind of the thought process regarding where we need to do if we come back, if that WBGT is in a higher level?
You would follow the modifications in that level. So if you move into the orange or the red, you are then adding 4 separate rest water breaks at 4 to 6 minutes each per hour. So that's why we take it every 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, you take it. It's not what it stands for the whole practice. So that's why we do adjust into moving into separate categories.
and would we say it is the total time in the non-climate controlled setting is what we're talking about with the maximum amount of time? Is that how we would word that? Like, because he's asking about going in a climate controlled setting with a large hour break.
Right. So as much time as they're practicing out afterwards. So let's just say they're finishing out the hour practice in an orange, they still need to have 4 rest breaks per hour.
Correct. Yeah.
So however long is remaining of that hour, of the few hours, like maybe you did half hour and then an hour in a climate controlled, you still have 2 hours, 2.5, whatever amount of time left, you still have to follow those modifications.
So even though that orange says maximum practice time is 2 hours, they only have an hour left of that practice. They would still have to go to the 4 separate rest water breaks during that last hour.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay.
We've got another new question that says, while looking at a projected forecast in the morning, for example, is there a best practice factor we look at while planning for an afternoon outdoor practice? I would want to try and advise our coaches a plan as early as possible, hopefully earlier than 15 to 20 minutes before practice starts.
Oh, go ahead, Anna.
No, I think just over the years, we kind of know what's coming, right? If it's going to be hot and miserable and humid, we can use the forecast to see a real field temp is miserable. And my cross country runners have done it for years, where they'll just say, like, it's going to be hot, and maybe it's not technically dangerous, and maybe we're not in the orange zone, but our runners are going to feel terrible, so we're going to bump it to the morning. I've had football teams do the same thing where, okay, yeah, we know we're going to be kind of on the edge here, or for storms or for other, environmental factors. We know this could be coming down the line. Let's shift it. Worst case scenario, you just had a morning practice and the afternoon wasn't so terrible, but you're not out practice time, nothing hurt. Okay. I don't know that there's a best practice when looking at forecasts outside of just that. I mean, you can go back to the charts that we've used for years and say, well, they're forecasting, 70% humidity and 106 degrees. Okay, what is that? Let's meet in the middle, right? On those charts that have been published for years. You could certainly use those. But I don't know of a wet bulb globe thermometry policy best practice for forecasting. Is that helpful?
We are starting to see trends that what our forecasters for like KCCI or like whatever our news or organization, and then also the National Weather Service are starting to use WBGT in their when they are presenting information. So I'm not sure if we're actually going to get on air WBGTs, but I know that the National Weather Service does. You can find it on there at some point. Now, I don't know if they're predictions. I think they're just current in a very specific location.
I just want to add one quick thing. I think those are great questions, Mason and Pete and stuff. I think that if you had a bunch of unlimited resources and a bunch of unlimited staff, I mean, you would put a wet bulb everywhere. You'd have like a cold immersion tape everywhere. And I don't think that's going to be probably realistic, even at like the most funded situation. You can try to predict too, but I think in most scenarios, like from a military perspective, when we had training evolutions, like there's a wet bulb out somewhere on like the most common training like platform, whether that's like on the football field or that's like on the track or if there's like another similar version of that, and someone just periodically checks it, right? I mean, if you come outside at noon and it's in the black, and you come out again at 3 o'clock closer to the end of school time and practice is supposed to be at 6, and it's still in the black, and there's nothing in the forecast that says that that's going to radically change in the future. I think that you have the entire day to kind of like tell your coaching staff that, like, look, we've been in the black for the entire day. The temperature is not going to change. There is no cloud coverage. There's no wind. There's not going to be this like drastic change in temperature. I would pick something off of your like calendar of what you plan on doing for the black workout today, or what we're going to do when we're in red flags category. And you can use the forecast in that direction. The wet bulb can sit somewhere. I don't know, like it's not going to be like, it's not like if it gets wet, it's going to break, right? And so like you can just like put it somewhere on your field and have someone periodically like check it and keep that in check. And then the other thing that was mentioned already too is like you essentially have to like just like modify some of these locations, right? You're not going to be able to, like people have mentioned, like be out on every single place where people are going to train at all times. But if you're checking that wet bulb on this football field and it's like, hey, it's been black all day, the cross country team is going to have to like run a little closer to home, whether it's like a track workout for the day, et cetera. And so I don't think that you have to have like all your bases covered and have all these resources. And I think you can like pre-plan for most of these things so that you're like ready in advance. And it's not, we're walking on the field in 15 minutes, someone's trying to fumble to get the wet bulb, and then 30 minutes after practice, we sort it out.
We've got one more question. Just will guidance be provided for tennis and track, thinking back to district track when the daytime highs were near 100 and late season tennis postseason meets with sustained high temps. So remember this screen that Rochelle has up right now. This is the guidance for every sport. Okay, we did give some specifics in sports, mostly related to like attire, things you wear, stuff like that. We don't have that issue necessarily in track and tennis, and they are on one surface pretty much the entire time, unless they're doing other cross conditioning in a different location. So the way I would say this is if there are things that come up that need individual attention, obviously our group is happy to look at those, but the guidance would be the same. So if you're plus 100 in a temperature and then you do your wet globe bulb thermometer reading and it is in black, you have the same guidance. And so tennis, things like, could you modify and instead of playing a third set, you play a tie break or you play a 10-game pro set or, that type of thing to shorten the amount of contest. I mean, I was a tennis player and I personally have had heat illness in a rough setting in some of my matches growing up. So I get this, 3-setters from 11 to 2, not fun. But ideally you would change the time or the duration of contests and give more breaks. So I think that's kind of the take home is those are things that are modifiable. And so if it comes up that we need to give in guidance on a global level of how to do that, we can assist with that if situations arise. But I think, if we start to think out of the box with how we can adjust these things ahead of time, then, it hopefully will be easy and amicable between coaches and different people hosting the contests and stuff. Got a couple more minutes. Any more questions at all?
I do not see any other questions coming up here. Like I said, we've still, thank you. We still have, over 40 people that are still participating here to the very end. So we've, taken approximately an hour here tonight. Rochelle and Anna and Sarah and Adam, thank you. Very specific, detailed information going forward here as we move on here. Like I said, there, with anything, the first time out, there's going to be, a lot of apprehension and nervousness and exactly what we're doing here. So this is exactly why, we wanted to roll this out for everybody, particularly too with the sport of football. We're just 3 days in. We're not into, contact yet. We're not in full pads, bringing people to the ground yet, until that Saturday. So we're still in, some shoulder pads and some shells right now. So this was a good opportunity for that for football. And fortunately, we've had a great, knock on wood, we've had a great 3 days here, weather-wise for the most part. So, this has been, very helpful. So again, thank you for being a part of it. I know Aaron, you're on the line here, so thank you very much for being with us here. Aaron Gerdick from the Girls Union. Thank you for your support with this, and we will get this recorded. I'll have Jason stop the recording, and we'll get this link out, and we'll get it on everybody's website. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to forward them to myself or to Aaron, and I will make sure to forward it on to these individuals and get a response back to you as soon as we can. So, Sarah, anything to conclude things with as we head into this new wonderful adventure?
No, I would just say, please, of course, feel free to reach out if you have questions. The way that we're doing that right now is if you reach out to the unions directly, they are then forwarding any questions to us and we're kind of giving them guidance back at this point. So, just don't be bashful, talk to your healthcare provider. 2/3 of our schools in the state of Iowa are lucky enough to have healthcare providers on the sidelines, which is honestly amazing. We are higher than most other states. So we do have resources, and if you don't have those resources, just feel free to let us know because we want to make sure that you're comfortable with all of this as well, and we're able to get you where you need to be. So
there was a question that popped up here. regarding the Kestrel device. It says, if I set the zones on the Kestrel device, am I using the low end of the range or the high end of the range on the chart? Anybody want to tackle that one, or any comfort level, or something we need to maybe look at?
My Kestrel hasn't arrived yet, so I need to. I would need to dig into the manual and see what how that all works. I've got a different model that I use at Liberty.
Okay.
So.
So fair enough. Like I said, so Dan, yeah, so Dan, we will we'll get this question figured out and get a response back to everybody regarding the. I'm not quite familiar with the zones as well too, so I'm not comfortable making any type of response with that either, Dan. So I guess you've stumped the committee to begin with. So congratulations. So
the zones basically are like it gives you the indicator, right? It tells you like which they use unrestricted, acclimatization, buffer, and I think like withdrawal as their like zones. So I would recommend just using the number at this point, until you can maybe specify itself, like you can program it as like yellow for that whole zone. So just note that the indicators of what the number is that's out is which are zones of yellow, are categories of color, is what would equate to.
Okay.
If that helps.
If it's a triggering, it's going to be the low end of the zone, right? Like, so if you're like trying to get which color it is, you're going to set it at the lower one, because then that's going to turn it orange, and then you're going to set it at the low end for black, orange, red, black. So that's what makes sense to me. But yeah, that's, I guess, my not knowing, because I haven't played with the machine yet.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Dan, for that. And hopefully we've answered your question properly, and if there's more research we need to do, we will check back. So, but all right, well, like I said, we've again 60 minutes gone very quickly. So hopefully we've helped everybody out. And like I said, again, Rochelle, Anna, Adam, Sarah, thank you very much for your time this evening. And best of luck to everybody this fall, and let us know if you have questions that arise, and we'll get you a response as quickly as we can. So with that, again, thank you all. Have a great evening and enjoy the last couple days here before we really get back into school and everybody arriving back with teachers and everybody next week. So thank you all, and good night.
Good night.